The coffee cup slipped from Maya's trembling hands, shattering against the pavement in 1,000 glittering pieces. Just like her carefully constructed world had shattered 3 hours earlier when she walked away from that man in the coffee shop without looking back. She had thought she was making the smartest decision of her life, protecting herself from what she assumed was just another smooth, talking stranger with empty promises. But the notification that now glowed on her phone screen made her knees buckle, made her heart hammer against her ribs like a caged bird desperately seeking freedom. She had made a terrible, terrible mistake. It had started on an ordinary Tuesday morning at Riverside Café, the kind of place where freelancers nursed lats for hours and the baristas knew everyone's order by heart. Maya had been there since dawn, laptop open, staring at her dwindling bank account balance with the kind of quiet desperation that comes from being 28 years old and watching your dreams crumble into dust. Her graphic design business was failing. Her rent was 3 weeks overdue. Her mother's medical bills were piling up like accusations she couldn't answer. She had exactly $42 to her name and a pride that refused to let her ask anyone for help. Tess, if you believe in kindness and second chances, if you believe that sometimes the universe puts people in our path for a reason, please hit that like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to this channel. Your support means everything, and this story will show you why we should never judge too quickly. Chess, the man had sat down at her table without invitation, his presence commanding attention even in his quiet approach. He wore an expensive watch that caught the morning light, a tailored suit that whispered of success, and he carried himself with the kind of confidence that Maya had learned to distrust. In her experience, men like this wanted something, always wanted something, and women like her, women who were struggling and vulnerable, were easy targets for their games. He had introduced himself as David, just David, and he had smiled at her with a warmth that seemed genuine, but that Maya immediately dismissed as practiced charm. He told her he had been watching her work for the past few mornings, had noticed the intensity with which she approached her laptop, the creative fire in her eyes that reminded him of himself years ago. He said he was impressed by the design portfolio she had accidentally left visible on her screen one day when she went to the restroom. He wanted to talk to her about an opportunity, he said. A chance to change everything. Maya had heard these lines before, or versions of them. 3 years ago, a man in a coffee shop had promised her a modeling opportunity that turned out to be a scam. 5 years before that, someone had offered her an investment opportunity that cost her every penny of her college savings. She had built walls around herself, thick and high, mortared with disappointment and reinforced with the bitter wisdom that comes from being burned too many times. So when David started talking about wanting to help her, about seeing potential in her work, about having connections that could transform her struggling business into something successful, every alarm bell in Maya's mind began ringing. She had listened to his pitch with growing skepticism, watching the way his hands moved as he spoke, the way his eyes never quite left her face, searching for signs of the manipulation she was certain was coming. He talked about a marketing firm he knew, about a client who needed exactly her style of design work, about a contract that could be worth $30,000 if she was interested. $30,000. The number hung in the air between them like a cruel joke, like bait on a hook, like every too good to be true offer she had ever been foolish enough to consider. When he pulled out his business card and slid it across the table, Maya didn't even look at it. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that made other patrons turn and stare. She told him, in a voice shaking with barely controlled anger, that she wasn't interested in whatever game he was playing. She told him she had heard it all before, had fallen for these tricks before, and she wasn't going to be anyone's fool ever again. She told him to find some other desperate woman to manipulate, some other struggling artist to exploit with his empty promises and his designer watch and his practiced smile. The look on his face had been something she couldn't quite read, something that might have been hurt, or might have been understanding, or might have been pity. He had simply nodded, wished her well, and watched as she gathered her things and stormed out of the café, leaving his untouched business card on the table like a rejected offering. Maya had felt righteous in her anger, proud of herself for seeing through what she was certain was a con, for protecting herself, for not being knave enough to fall for sweet words and grand promises. She had gone home to her tiny apartment, to her unpaid bills and her dying laptop and her fear, and she had told herself she had done the right thing. She had been strong, she had been smart, she had learned from her past mistakes, but the encounter had left her unsettled, had planted a seed of doubt that grew throughout the day, spreading its roots into her certainty until she found herself, hours later, Googling the name that had been written on that business card she hadn't bothered to read. The search results had loaded slowly on her struggling internet connection, and with each passing second, Maya's heart had begun to race with a dread she couldn't name. And then the screen filled with articles, with photographs, with interviews and accolades, and a story so extraordinary that it made her head spin. David Morrison. Not just David, but David Morrison, the tech entrepreneur who had sold his startup for $300 million 5 years ago. David Morrison, who had since dedicated his life to finding and funding struggling artists and small business owners, who had a foundation that had helped launch over 200 successful ventures. David Morrison, whose own sister had died because she couldn't afford her cancer treatment, and who had made it his mission to ensure no one else lost someone they loved to the cruelty of financial desperation. The articles were everywhere, a digital testament to a man who had transformed personal tragedy into purpose. There were stories of the graphic designer in Portland whose business he had saved, the musician in Atlanta whose career he had launched, the single mother in Chicago whose café he had rescued from bankruptcy. There were interviews where he talked about walking into coffee shops and observing people, looking for the quiet desperation in their eyes, the determination in their hunched shoulders, the dreams they were still fighting for despite impossible odds. He never made a big show of it, the article said. He approached people quietly, offered help humbly, and followed through on every promise he made. And Maya had called him a con artist. She had accused him of manipulation. She had rejected the one genuine miracle that had walked into her struggling life, had thrown away the answer to prayers she had stopped praying because she no longer believed anyone was listening. The coffee cup shattering at her feet brought her back to the present moment, standing outside Riverside Cafe with tears streaming down her face and the weight of her mistake crushing her chest. She had run all the way there, her phone clutched in her hand, hoping against hope that he might still be inside, that she might have a chance to apologize, to explain, to beg for the forgiveness she didn't deserve. But when she looked through the window, his table was empty. The business card was gone, and Maya understood with crystal clarity that some opportunities only knock once, that some angels only visit you one time. And if you slam the door in their faces, they don't come back. She stood there on the sidewalk, surrounded by the broken pieces of her coffee cup, which seemed like a perfect metaphor for everything she had shattered with her fear and her pride and her inability to recognize genuine kindness when it was offered freely. The other patrons inside the cafe were staring at her now, this woman crying on the street, but Maya didn't care. She was thinking about her mother, who needed medication they couldn't afford. She was thinking about her business, which would close within weeks. She was thinking about all the dreams she had worked so hard to build, and how close she had come to saving them, only to destroy that chance with her own hands. If this story has touched your heart, if you've ever made a mistake you wish you could take back, if you've ever let fear make you push away the very help you needed, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment telling us about second chances. Your engagement helps us share these important stories with more people who need to hear them. But here is what Maya couldn't know as she stood there in her grief. David Morrison was still in the cafe. He had been watching from a corner table, hidden behind a newspaper, because this was something he had learned to do over the years. He waited to see if people would come back, if they would overcome their fear and their pride and their past traumas enough to accept help. He waited because the people who came back, who fought through their own resistance, who were brave enough to be vulnerable after being hurt, those were the people whose businesses succeeded. Those were the people who paid it forward. Those were the people who understood the value of what they were being given. Drop a comment right now if you think Maya deserves a second chance. He stood up slowly, walked to the door, and pushed it open. The bell chimed softly. Maya looked up, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen, her whole body trembling with regret. And David Morrison smiled at her with the same warmth he had shown that morning, pulled out a clean handkerchief from his pocket, and said simply that he had been hoping she would come back. He said that the best people always did. That courage wasn't about never being afraid. It was about feeling the fear and choosing trust anyway. He said that her reaction that morning told him everything he needed to know about how many times she had been hurt, how hard she had been fighting, how much she had survived, and those, he said, were exactly the qualities that made someone worth investing in. 3 months later, Maya's graphic design business was thriving under a contract that had indeed been worth $30,000 exactly as promised. But more than that, she had learned something invaluable about the cost of letting past pain dictate present choices, about the courage it takes to remain open in a world that gives you every reason to close yourself off, about the fact that sometimes the people who seem too good to be true are simply good people being true to their purpose. She kept that business card in a frame on her desk, a reminder that second chances exist, that angels walk among us, and that the only thing more tragic than needing help is refusing to accept it when it's freely given. And every time she looked at it, Maya whispered a quiet thank you for the moment she found the courage to go back, to admit she was wrong, to trust when every instinct told her to run. Because that moment, that choice, had changed absolutely everything.